welcome to Anchored by the Word, the podcast ministry of Westlake Baptist Church in Moneta, Virginia. With your host, Pastor Justin Likens.
Welcome in, everybody, to this week's edition of Anchored by the Word. Joining me today is the most beautiful co-host I could ever have, my wife, Diana. Welcome back, Diana.
Thanks for having me. It's fun to be back.
Well, you're welcome on the podcast anytime you want to. So our topic for this week is on the busyness of life and the distractions that come our way. And I think it's a pretty fitting topic for you and I because you were on the podcast back in March. And believe it or not, that was 2 months ago. And I've just been sitting back thinking of all the things that have happened in our family in just these last 2 months. So it's a reminder that time flies. But so I have a confession to make to our audience. Diana, you already know this, but when you and I first got married, I used to lie a lot. Now, let me explain that before people go, wait a minute, why is Pastor lying? I would always tell you that if we could just get through this season, whatever this season was, then I wouldn't be as busy. Now, I've come to realize that this season of not being busy is a myth, a unicorn, a lie. I don't know about you, but I feel like we're running 100 miles an hour most of the time. And there are times where maybe we slow it down to 99 miles an hour, but then just seems to crank right back up. Do you think that's a fair assessment?
Absolutely. If we ever got a break, I don't know what we'd do with it.
You know, I'd probably find something to do because I just can't sit still. That's a me problem, not a you problem. And I know we are not unique in that. I'm sure husbands and wives, parents listening to this podcast, they probably feel a lot of the same way that you and I are feeling. When we get busy, it's easy to become distracted about what really matters. And honestly, to lose a little bit, if not a lot, of the joy that should be in our life. And I think that's one thing that as Christians, Jesus says he wants us to have joy and it to be complete. Of course, that's in him. And so that means that we need to learn to not only identify distractions, but then deal with them in a healthy way. But before we can talk about distractions, we need to know, what are we being distracted from? We need to ask the question then, what is our purpose in this life? The Westminster Shorter Catechism in question 1 says the chief end of man is to glorify God and to enjoy him forever. Now, this comes out of Colossians chapter 1, where Paul writes that we are created by him and for him. Paul also says in 1 Corinthians 10 that whatever we do, we are to glorify God. So if we were to answer the question, what is my purpose? Well, my purpose is to know God and to have a relationship with him. Specifically, we need to have a growing relationship with God. So let's talk about this in terms of a marriage. You and I, Diana, we just celebrated 20 years together a few months back. What does it take to have a healthy, growing marriage?
Well, I believe that the biggest thing necessary to have a growing marriage is communication. With communication, we also have to put time in to learn one another, because even though we have been married for 20 years, there is still more that we need to learn about one another. And that's because, we're changing and we're growing, and we're never going to run out of things to learn about the other person. And I think that if that's true for our marriage, how much more is it true for our relationship with an all-knowing and infinite God? We have to keep communicating with him. We have to keep studying him. We can never grow tired or think that we've learned all there is to know.
Absolutely. You've heard me say it in sermons and other places. I've been in ministry now 19 years, 16 of them here at Westlake, I've preached, I don't know how many sermons or taught how many lessons, but the reality is you can study the Bible every moment of every day for all of your life, and when you die, you still won't know all there is to know about God. And so I think, to add on top of what you were saying, I think we have to be intentional. Growth in marriage or our relationship with God, it isn't something that's just going to happen. We're going to have to be very intentional with how we spend our time. The reality is there's a lot of good things that we can do with our time. But we want to make sure that we are redeeming our time, as Paul says in Ephesians, by doing the things that will help us know God deeper and to make him known to others.
Talking about that reminds me of the story of Mary and Martha in Luke 10. If you're familiar with that story, then you'll know in that story, Martha was preparing the house and the food for all the company that she had. And Martha got frustrated because there was her sister Mary, and Mary was not helping in the preparations at all. She was sitting at Jesus' feet learning from him. And it's not that Martha was doing anything wrong, but really the issue is they had two different focuses. Martha's focus was on the things of this world, what the people expected of her. And that was to have the house clean and the food ready. But Mary had a different priority, and her priority was that while I have this opportunity with my Lord and Savior, I'm going to soak up everything he has to say, and the housework can wait. So it wasn't that Martha was wrong. It was just they had different focuses. And we know that Mary's focus was the godly focus, the best choice, while Martha's was more worldly.
Yeah, Jesus even says there in Luke 10 that Mary has chosen the better, and it's not going to be taken from her. So what are some of the biggest distractions that we can face in growing in our relationship with God? How would you answer that?
Well, I'm kind of ashamed to say it, but in a lot of ways, some of my biggest distractions are the very same distractions that Martha was struggling with. As a woman, as a wife, a mother, there are certain things that I feel are expected of me, and maybe even more so because I'm a stay-at-home mom. I'm raising 4 children, and as a pastor's wife, anybody who's raising children knows that does not lead to a real steady schedule. It seems to me like no one day looks like the day before. So finding time to study and pray is often squeezed in between our other obligations. And I'll just give you today as an example. Justin and I, we had planned that we were going to record this podcast together. And I said, yeah, today is a great day. Other than taking the kids to school and picking them up, there is absolutely nothing in my schedule that absolutely has to get done today. But the problem came in with a lot of distractions. I dropped the kids off at school, and I thought, as soon as I get home, I'll get right in the Word and I'll pray and I'll be prepared to set up this podcast. But when I got home, I realized that our child that does virtual schooling was not up and doing his schoolwork yet. So I had to kind of check in with him and make sure he was getting busy doing what he needed to do. And then I realized, the dog still hasn't been walked, so he needs to be walked and fed. And I did that. I came in from doing that, and I needed to go get my Bible. Well, when I went and got my Bible, I saw some other things that needed to be taken care of. So I thought, well, while I'm grabbing my Bible, I'll just get these things done real quick. And then I sat down ready with my Bible, and my phone rang, and I answered that phone call, dealt with that issue, got back to study, was studying for a couple of minutes. The phone rang again. And so I answered that phone call and dealt with that. Well, then I got off that phone call, and the phone in my hand, I just quickly scrolled through social media. Then I was like, what am I doing? I've got things to do. So I looked at the clock. Well, now it was time to make lunch. And by the time that I got finished making lunch, well, then my child was done with his schoolwork for the day, and he came out and had things that he wanted to talk to me about. And then by the time we got done with all of that, it was time to go pick up the kids from school. And I realized that I had not done the one and only thing that was on my to-do list for today, and that was to study and prepare to do this podcast.
The thing that just keeps running through my mind, and the church has heard it, you've heard it, the kids have heard it. If you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. I think we always begin with the best of intentions, and somewhere along the line, it kind of runs off the rails. Now, it certainly happens a lot for me. I have ADD, so Old MacDonald had a farm, E-I-E-I, squirrel. That is pretty much how my mind works 24/7. But I would add to that, probably another distraction is technology. Now, that's hard to say because I enjoy technology. I like new shiny things. I like learning all the new things that they can do. But I think we have to be honest. We have bought into a lie that technology is going to make our life easier. And in some ways, it has. But in a lot of ways, it has made it so much more complicated. I think about, for me as a pastor and a chaplain, I'm never off duty. My phone never gets turned off. I can have plans for a day, but one ring, one text can change every bit of that. And I know I'm not alone in that. But outside of just those things, there's social media. You were talking about it in the course of today. You sit down, you got a few minutes, you're like, hey, I've got some notifications on Facebook or Instagram or X or whatever. So you just sit there and you're like, I'm just going to check my notifications. And then you start scrolling and scrolling and scrolling. Well, next thing you know, you look up, 10 to 15 minutes or longer is gone. Or one thing that I can fall into is I'll come home and I'll sit down, and I know I've got a couple things I need to get done, before going to bed. But I'm like, hey, I'm just going to turn on a show real quick. Now, you and I probably watch the same 4 or 5 shows. We probably know every episode by heart, but I don't care. If it's on, I'm going to sit down and watch a few minutes of it, or I tell myself a few minutes. It's kind of like the movie Forrest Gump. Now, I don't know how our audience feels about the movie. I personally think it's a pretty goofy movie, but if it's on, I'm going to watch 10 to 15 minutes of it, and then I'm going to sit here and go, well, there's 10 to 15 minutes of my life I'm never getting back. And so it's just these little things that rob us of our time, that they distract us from what really matters. Is scrolling social media a problem? No. Is watching a goofy movie or a TV show a problem? No. But if it's robbing us of intimacy in our marriage, or spending time with the kids, or getting time in the Word, or memorizing it, well, now we've become distracted by things that don't really matter. And that's kind of what we're getting at. This one also might sound a little strange, but I think sometimes relationships can become a distraction. When we prioritize any one person above God, they've become an idol to us. There have been countless stories of how one spouse, and it's typically the husband, but not always, he says, I don't want you going to church. I only have 2 days off, and one of them is Sunday, and I want you to spend that time with me. Now, the wife not only knows she should go to church, she wants to go to church, but she also desires peace in her marriage. She wants peace in her household, and so she allows her husband to become that distraction from that intimacy with God that she needs and craves. And so I think those are two distractions that come to my mind. I'm sure you've got another one, Diana.
Well, honestly, if I really think on it, the biggest distraction in my life is me. Selfishness. We know as believers that we are called to die to ourselves so that Christ can live through us. But it's really hard to die to yourself every day. Sometimes the things that I desire the most are not the things that God desires for me. I know not everybody falls into this, but I personally am a people pleaser. And as such, I seek validation from other people. And I can get so caught up in maintaining an image that really doesn't represent who I am that I don't maintain my relationship with Christ the way that I should.
Yeah, and I think, most of us don't want to admit it, but I think there's some people pleasing in every one of us. We all want to be liked. We all want to feel loved. And so a lot of times we're willing to do whatever it takes to be liked or to feel loved. And certainly that is caused many young and young at heart people to make very poor decisions that have very real consequences to it.
You're right about that, but I just think it's, if I'm so focused on me and what I want to do, that distracts me from the goal of knowing God and enjoying life with Him.
Absolutely. Another one that I think does it, especially in our country, is that of sports. Specifically kids sports. Now, I say this as somebody who played sports all of my life. Our children are in sports, and we've talked about this in a previous episode. It's really tough at times because you want your kids to play sports, learn valuable lessons, socialize. You want them to be out in the world, but not of the world, as Paul says in Romans 12. But what we're seeing is the more our society becomes secularized, the emphasis on church attendance has waned. It used to be that you wouldn't have games until Sunday afternoon. Now, they're all weekend. They start Friday night, they're all day Saturday, they're all day Sunday. Lifeway and Barna recently put out the results of a study that said Christian families who used to attend 3 to 4 Sundays a month, they're now only attending 1 to 2 Sundays a month. When asked why that shift, the number one reason was children's sports or children's activities. And again, it's not that kids playing sports is a problem. It's actually a really good thing. But when it becomes the main thing, it becomes a problem. I'm sure there's a lot more distractions that even you and I are thinking of right now. This is what I want to say to our audience. If you'll go over to our Instagram page or Facebook, leave us a comment or two on the distractions that you face. By doing that, it could be a way that we can pray for one another. You may not ever meet most people who listen to this, but we can pray for one another because we're brothers and sisters in Christ. We can encourage one another, and by doing something like this, it's a great reminder we're not alone in our struggles. That is one of the biggest things that Satan wants to lie to us about, is, we can't be honest about what we're struggling with, because nobody else is struggling with it, and they're going to judge us. So I hope you'll go over there and one of those two places. Leave us, something there in the comments, and let's pray for one another. So, Diana, let's end this episode by giving maybe some practical tips on how we can minimize the distractions in our life so that we grow in our walk with God. Because I really believe if you talk to Christians and you ask them, do you want to grow in your faith? They're all going to say yes. But then if you ask that follow-up, well, are you? I think a lot more are going to say, you know what, I'm really not. And it's a source of pain and embarrassment and maybe even frustration. So let's kind of give maybe 2, 3, maybe 4 little tips. Maybe that will help them out. And for me, the first one I would say is this. We need to be honest. Now, this might sting a little bit, but it's true nevertheless. We can be as close to God as we want to be. We just have to ask, am I willing to make the sacrifices necessary to make it happen?
I think that's a great one. Next, I would say firmly establish what your goals are. Remember what we talked about in the beginning, the purpose of our life. It is to glorify God and to enjoy Him forever. So how we accomplish this is going to look different for each and every person. For some of us, maybe it's joining a discipleship group, getting around others who share our faith and who can encourage us in righteousness, where we can go to ask the questions that we have and really to grow in our faith. Maybe others, it'll be just looking for what are some of the distractions that we can cut out. And when we do cut out those distractions, that's going to give us more time in our schedule to pray, study, or even begin serving in our church. Now, to kind of piggyback off of that, I am a list person. I don't know if anybody else is like me, but I can get so overwhelmed by all the things that need to be accomplished that I actually shut down and don't accomplish anything. So for me, it's really important that I make a list. When I make a list, I'm able to prioritize what are the things that I would like to get done today versus what are the things that absolutely have to get done today. Now, when I go about each day, I make my list. There are certain things that just go on the list and they're concrete. And those are my appointments, because all of us know if you miss a doctor's appointment, you're going to have to pay a penalty for missing it. And none of us wants to do that. Plus, we don't want to have to go through the hassle of rescheduling. For me, if we are willing to make those doctor's appointments concrete parts of our schedule, how much more so should our time with God be a concrete part of our schedule? Because no, you're not going to have to pay a fee if you miss that time, but I promise there are consequences. And it's not like God's following you around and getting you because you didn't do what you were supposed to do. The consequences are really in our attitude, in our hearts, being able to look at the circumstances around us and see the good in them when our natural inclination is to see the bad. Our time with God is the biggest part in helping us to see the positives in life. So making a list really helps me to remind myself, what are my priorities? So if I find myself not growing, not hearing from God, I can look back on those previous lists and go, maybe my priorities that day needed to be a little bit shifted so that I could be in a better place spiritually, mentally, and physically for not only myself, but for everyone around me.
Absolutely. I am 100% a list guy myself. Again, ADD. I am great at starting things. I struggle to finish things, and so lists really kind of help. But again, it really does reveal your priorities. So I'll give one more, and I would say this: it's time limits. Now, I know on Apple products you can do this, and I'm sure you can do it on Samsung or Google products as well. But you can go into your phone and you can actually set time limits for individual apps for each day. Now, here's the key. You have to discipline yourself that when that time limit is up, you get off the app and get back to what matters. And Diana, you have mentioned a discipleship group a couple of times. This is really where a discipleship group can help you, because they can hold you accountable by asking the question, hey, how much time are you spending on social media, watching TV, binge watching streaming shows? How much time are you doing these things? I know for me, it's set up that every Sunday morning about 9 o'clock, my phone and my tablet send me a little message and says, your screen time last week averaged this. And if I go in, I can see a detailed breakdown of the overall week or even day by day. How much time did I spend in each of those apps? And so, again, it just helps me ask and answer the question, am I living for the glory of God? Am I striving to grow in my walk with God, or am I wasting my life? And so I really hope that these things are going to help you out. Maybe you've got another suggestion, something that you found, a quote unquote life hack. Go ahead, again, go over to Instagram or Facebook, Anchored by the Word. It's the title for either page. Drop it in there. We can not only pray and encourage one another, we can help one another. But that's going to bring us to the end of this episode. I want to say, as always, thank you for listening. Now, I do have a very big announcement. We have been teasing this out over the past couple of weeks. I am absolutely stoked for a new co-host that we're going to have. His name is Keith Foskey. He's a pastor down in Jacksonville, Florida. Dr. Foskey is on social media. His handle is Your Calvinist. You've probably seen his stuff. You may not realize it, but he makes some of the funniest videos you will ever watch. But he's also a podcaster, pastor, and a teacher who is really faithful to the Word of God. And Dr. Foskey has graciously agreed to come on the podcast. We're going to record it, and we're going to release it June 4th. And June 4th is going to be the official kickoff of our second season of Anchored by the Word. So we're really excited not only to have him join us, but we're excited to get to season 2 and to see where God is going to continue to take this podcast. For that, I have to say thank you to our audience. You guys have been so faithful in listening. You've been encouraging, and we are just so very grateful for you. But as much as I'm looking forward to Dr. Foskey, and I know we're going to have some laughs for that, Diana, you will always, always, always be my favorite co-host. Thank you so much for joining me.
It was a pleasure being here with you today.
I look forward to recording with you more in the future. But again, thank you to the audience for listening. We hope this has been helpful. If it has, would you share it so that others can benefit from it as well? And we look forward to seeing you next week right here on Anchored by the Word.
This has been Anchored by the Word. Copyright 2025 to Westlake Baptist Church, 2075 Scruggs Road, Moneta, Virginia.